The biggest Dragon Ball movie in history finally hits US shores. Beautiful friends from all around the world, I am your host Blackenfist, and I got the privilege to see Battle of Gods in theaters. Something that, man, I thought was not going to actually happen for quite some time, considering all the legal battles that I'm pretty sure Funimation had to fight with 20th Century Fox. But it happened, and I'm glad I got to see it. And this here is going to be the most powerful review of Battle of Gods out there. Let's get right into this review. We're going to go right into the story of Battle of Gods. It starts off with Goku, as we all know, training on King Kai's planet. We later learn about a god of destruction. We learn that to keep balance, not only do they have to be gods that create things, such as the Kais, but also ones that destroy things. And that would be Beerus, who is called the Destroyer in this movie. And of course, because of the nature of his own job, he is of course very strong, claiming to be the strongest being in the universe. And of course, because of that, Goku wants to fight him, eager always to take on stronger and stronger opponents. Goku of course gets flicked off pretty easily by Beerus, and he goes down to Earth looking for a Super Saiyan God. Throughout the whole movie, we see Vegeta comically trying to appease the God of Destruction so he wouldn't destroy the Earth. And of course, we have a lot of lighthearted scenes at Bulma's birthday party. Eventually, Goku does become the Super Saiyan God and fights Beerus. But even then, he will still not be able to defeat him. That was just a quick rundown of the summary, but one thing that I must stress is that this story is actually very lighthearted. But in terms of just how lighthearted Dragon Ball goes, I thought it was pretty good. The only two gripes I could have had possibly was the fact that maybe that whole 5 Super Saiyan thing came out of nowhere, and that perhaps the ending was a little bit too anticlimactic because of all that build-up throughout the whole movie of a Super Saiyan God. But other than that, the humor I thought was on point for the most part, and it was of course lighthearted Dragon Ball at its best. Now I can understand if you don't like Dragon Ball lighthearted, you might have a problem with this, as I've seen already many people have, but I'm pretty sure most of the fans will understand this. And of course, next category, animation. It's always good to see new Dragon Ball things newly animated, especially since Dragon Ball is a pretty old series at this point. And of course, as you could tell, the animation is pretty top-notch. We can finally see some of these fight scenes run at a much smoother pace. However, if there's one gripe, and in fact I think the biggest gripe I have with this movie is the use of CG. Now, granted, I didn't have much problem with a lot of the CG that was in this movie. However, there were certain moments in the movie that were used, especially during the fight scenes, that really took me out of the whole movie for me. Granted, I don't think most of the CG that was used in this movie was a big deal. And the reason I say this is because the CG just clashed so unnaturally with the 2D animation. And I really felt that just brought me out of it. Other than that, though, the animation was top-notch. One thing I do hope, though, is that in the future, they don't rely too much on the CG. I wouldn't mind if CG was maybe used for backgrounds and such like that, but if there's something in the foreground, like characters fighting, I would much prefer that being animated in 2D animation, because anytime it was, one big example for me was the first fight that Goku had with Beerus on King Kai's planet. That looked pretty damn good, and I think that's something that they should take into the next movie. Now we move on to the characters. Now the characters of the movie. Of course, I think the highlight is the 2 movie characters that are exclusive to this movie so far. But you know what? Seeing Goku and his gang all the way back together again on the big screen really is something. And speaking of characters, I think it was actually pretty funny that Oob was nowhere to be found. That's right, at the end of the Dragon Ball manga, Oob was supposedly the guy to inherit Goku's job, you could say, but he's nowhere to be found anywhere in this movie. Maybe I missed him, maybe he wasn't there, but he definitely wasn't a big part of this movie. But regardless, no Oob, better for the movie. And you know, when I first saw Emperor Pilaf come up on the screen, man, did I get a smile on my face. The very fact that a character and his henchmen are in this movie was just a pretty amazing thing to happen. I'm glad to see him as much as I did in the movie. I was pretty psyched when I saw this in the trailer. My biggest concern when I saw Pilaf in the trailer was the fact that maybe he would only be in the movie for like a minute or something. Just a very teensy tiny cameo. I'm glad to report that if you're a Pilaf fan like I am, boy oh boy is there plenty of Pilaf stuff in this movie, as well as for Mai and Shu. So just to see a character like that from the very beginning of Dragon Ball, the king of comic relief villains in Dragon Ball in my opinion, to see him in this movie which is so lighthearted and comical, just only made sense to put him in. The two highlights of course are Beerus, the Destroyer, God of Destruction, and Whis, who I guess is his assistant or teacher, you could say, in this movie. Now, in the case of Beerus, I heard a lot of people argue that Beerus isn't really a traditional Dragon Ball villain, and I guess he isn't, especially a traditional Dragon Ball movie villain who are just straight up evil. Some people argue that Beerus is not even a villain, and I could see kind of what they're coming from, because Beerus, he didn't come there for evil intentions, he just came there because it was kind of his job, and it is his job to destroy things. However, I do think that you could still classify him as a villain, although I can see how some people might not because of the nature of his character. I think it's actually pretty cool to finally have a pretty comical Dragon Ball movie villain in one of these movies for once. Janemba did come pretty close, the fat version at least, but other than that, we really hadn't had any of those types of villains in the movies. And I thought it was pretty cool to see it here on Dragon Ball's biggest movie. The character of Beerus really reflects the movie as a whole, and no surprises because he's one of the main characters in it. And also at times, just like the movie, it seems that he doesn't take himself too seriously. But of course guys, we didn't see this movie in Japanese. This was the English dub of the movie. So of course, next category is how was the dub. I think it was great to hear Sean Schemmel and the whole cast return for their respective roles. Now I know some people are going to be talking about this, so I guess I'll have to mention it. Tiffany Viano, who is the voice of Bulma, did not return to reprise her role in this movie. But she also didn't reprise her role in Dragon Ball Kai, so they used the Kai replacement of Bulma instead of her. I thought she did fine as Bulma. I have no complaints from me. In fact, that was one of the Kai voice changes I really didn't care much about. I thought she does a good job. The only thing I could say Tiffany did better with Bulma is that perhaps she gave Bulma, the character, a bit more energy in her voice. But that's about it. She did a good job. As for everyone else, they're the exact same voices that you would probably remember from the show. But of course, once again, the highlights are the two new characters who had two new voice actors, which I have to say, the casting for these two guys was absolutely perfect. Both of them had great voices to go along with their characters, and I would also have to say that the translation was pretty damn solid. Of course, in the Japanese, Beerus was called God of Destruction, and in the English dub, he's just kind of shortened to the Destroyer, but it doesn't really matter. I think the Destroyer conveys the same meaning as God of Destruction does. Perhaps some big purists might have a problem with him being called the Destroyer and not God of Destruction, but for the most part, the translation is solid. But overall, guys, what do I have to say about this movie? I'd have to say that this is definitely one of the best Dragon Ball movies I've ever seen. Is it the best? Possibly. I don't know if you know this, guys, but I did do a video where I ranked every movie, and in that video I said Wrath of the Dragon is my favorite. I would have to watch that movie again with Battle of Gods to see if it still holds up, but Battle of Gods definitely has to be one of the best, if not the best movie that has come out to date. And there's also one other thing, guys. Apparently, there's two versions of this movie. There's a theatrical version, and then there's an extended cut version that actually adds 30 extra minutes of footage to the movie. I've never seen this version, but you can bet that I will definitely review that when it comes out. And if it doesn't come out, I'll still review it because I will get my hands on that version of the movie one way or another. No doubt about that. From what I've heard, it's just a lot of extended scenes, but that really wouldn't bother me. The movie is already pretty great. But anyway, guys, that has been the most powerful Dragon Ball Z Battle of Gods review out there. And you know what? I think most of you have already heard that they've already greenlit a sequel to this movie. So it's always good to see that the Dragon Ball franchise is steamrolling ahead, still staying strong. But anyway, guys, I would want you to stay tuned because even though this has been my review, I have a lot more things to say about Battle of Gods, so stay tuned for that. But as for now, I am Blackenfist.